Welcome to Operation Vagabond Falcon Part 14. This episode is brought to you by the letter G for also brought to you by the letter A for air hose, and the letters D and D for double D shaft, and the letter B for bench. And we measure up our double D steering shaft. Everything is a dick with car builds. Seriously, this steering shaft is called a double D, and the universal joints are made by a company called Flaming River. Everything is dicks and titties and dicks and titties and dicks and titties and dicks and titties. And motor mounts. I'm putting the steering shaft back in and taking it out and putting it back in again because it's time to measure this and get this steering wheel to control the hubs again. In a 1960 Falcon, the only thing separating you from the outside of the car via the firewall is a rubber diaper. You know, where the hole for the steering column goes through? Yeah, it's just a rubber diaper and then these two clamps that hold it in place with screws. So what we're doing here, you can see that blue thing in the middle is our motor mount that I took off the 302 Redeemer and put it onto the cross member so we can check out what kind of clearance we have, because if you look down there you see that the rack and pinion steering, the input shaft from that is pretty close to that motor mount where the motor mount connects to the cross member. So I take the entire steering column over to a vise and guess what it's and there's my shortened hole. But we realize it's not short enough. And if there ever was a case for using a B&M mega shifter on the car, here it is now. The steering column has to get shorter, and to do that you have to chop into the shift linkage going down there. There's no going back. I have to chop it off. And what I'm about to realize in a few seconds is that, you know when you have a column shift car, how there's tension on the column shifter, yeah, as you move it through the gears? Well, that tension isn't up there at the shifter. It's way down at the bottom of the steering column. And I'm about to release that tension on a spring that has been compressed for 56 years. Boing, oing, 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 oing. Replay. And now that it's out, you can pull the entire inner steering column out from the rest of the steering column. So what we're going to have when eventually this car is done is that there's going to be nothing inside of that steering column other than the double D shaft running down from the steering wheel. So the steering shaft goes in and we measure how much more we're going to trim. And it's the next day. I spared you more video of and you can see up there in the corner that the steering shaft is now shorter. I cut it to the correct size this morning. But we don't have enough clearance yet. I need to do more to the bottom of the cross member from the TCI suspension. I need to lose about 1/8 of an inch off the bottom of that. There's room, I can do it, but we need more clearance. We need a little over 1/4 of an inch. And the way to do that is to lower the rack and pinion steering assembly. And the way you do that is to unbuckle it from the cross member, and it's not going to fall down because it's still attached to the tie rods. You can shove it back up and then get in there with a little grinder and lower the holes, make the holes bigger on the bottom, and then you rebolt the rack and pinion assembly. Now it's time to talk about brakes. The 1960 Ford Falcon has 4-wheel drums and a single master cylinder unboosted. We're putting in a dual master and power brakes. Now we're running into a problem, and as of this video it hasn't been solved yet. What you see here is the linkage coming from the original brake pedal that would have gone in to the stock single master cylinder, but it doesn't connect to a power booster. We'll figure that out later. This power booster and dual master cylinder comes from Speedway, so thank you very much, Chad from Speedway, and an adapter plate to adapt it to a 1960 Falcon. The master cylinder bolts onto the end of the booster, and here's the propo valve, the proportioning valve. What a proportioning valve does, and you know, modern cars have them, but old cars didn't, is to correctly balance the amount of brake fluid going to the front brakes and the rear brakes. It's not supposed to be 50-50. The front brakes are supposed to get more power than the rear. And this is especially true with these classic cars that originally just had drum brakes. When you put 4-wheel discs on them, without that proportioning valve, if you step on that brakes, the rears will lock up all the time. You want to have the front brakes engaging harder than the rears. If you ride motorcycles, you can think of it this way. If you ride a motorcycle, your front and rear brakes, on most of them, you are the proportioning valve. You control how much each one gets. And of course, you load up the front brakes much more than the rear. I mean, sometimes if you're lazy like me, sometimes you even forget the rear brake. You just stop them with the front all the time. Anyway, this is a proportioning valve. It's not the fancy ones that have the knob on it that you can dial in. That's for track use. This one just finds a happy balance to keep you safe. But there are more brake lines that need to come in and out of it. Now it's the next day. Hey, it's Justin Kramer, part of the Sloppy Mechanics. He came by today to help us out with the brakes and weld up some little pieces there because Bruce is busy working on the Studebaker again. And I get to learn how to flare brake lines. This is my first time doing this, and we have stainless steel ones, which I've been told are a pain in the ass because they're hard. And my wrist was killing me after this day. You get this crazy tool and you shove stuff in there and you pump it, and then it flares. Innuendo. That was it today. It was all brake lines. And we didn't even get to do all of them. We just started figuring out a game plan because we don't know where the exhaust is going to be. We don't know where the drive shaft's going to be. So mostly what I spent the time doing today is worrying. The difference between RCR, this build from regular car reviews, and real car shows is that in the car shows, like, oh no, here comes the deadline and it's creeping forward and the boss goes around and stomps around the shop. We got to get it on time. But in the end, the hero always wins and the car always gets done at the 11th hour. There's a real chance we're not going to make June 1st. That doesn't mean we fail. It just means, well, we may miss Ford Nationals at Carlisle and have to debut the Falcon somewhere else. That's what makes it exciting and a little bit fearful. You may not make your deadline. And really, the only person who's capable of making that deadline is me. Operation Vagabond Falcon is my job now. I'm at Bruce's every day, and when I'm not, I have a damn good excuse. Regular car reviews will return in that the Monday morning reviews will come back, but I have to devote my entire day to this car. But don't worry, we've been writing during this time, we've been creating stuff, and all the evil and the bile and the pus and the tits and the cum, it's all been building up. So when it comes time to do reviews again, they're gonna be dirty. The next day, these are panels that cover up the big hole that we cut into the side of the Falcon when we put in the AA arm suspension and coilovers. These come with the TCI suspension kit, although they're not painted. These are the ones I painted with that $25 can of Ford Color Code J, so it looks correct. I see a little bit of color difference, don't I? I should have just bought the Duplicolor stuff and called it a life. Anyway, they bolt on, so it's a lot of bolts from in and out. Time to get that Champion radiator I bought way back when and put it in upside down, and I figure out to put it in right side up. In building this car, nothing has been bolt up. Nothing. Everything's required grinding and tweaking and grinding. But this Champion radiator was one of the few things that bolted right in. I didn't have to figure anything out. Hallelujah, the bolts lined up. Now we have the Radiator Fan, which came from Speedway. Thank you again, Chad. This is an electric fan, which fits this perfectly. I'm just learning how this goes in. Yes, we could have put a bracket on this and not have to worm our way through the veins of the radiator, but time is now our god. And this is a traditional way of doing it, and as long as you get a thin screwdriver and carefully use a flathead screwdriver, you can mount a fan to a radiator and not hurt anything, and that's what I'm doing here. Back to the steering shaft, there's another safety thing you have to do to these. Yes, it is a double D shaft, and yes, the little bolts there, the little Allen screws, go in and press against the side, but what you should do is to get a drill bit and make a little divot into which those screws can sit. It's an extra bit of safety to make sure that your steering is never going to get loose and never going to jiggle. I take my D shaft out and put it in a vise, and then I get a little punch. These things are great. You press them down, they go tink, and they make a nice little divot. That's so when I put my drill bit in, it doesn't start wandering around and miss my mark that I put right on there. You know what? I'm done with electric drills. They have air here, so I'm going to use the air drills. Now I can put them in, and those little Allen screws go in and seat perfectly. When you tighten that down, steering is gonna be tight. Oh, steering so tight! More Speedway stuff. Remember how the old radiator on the stock Falcon peed on the ground? There was no overflow tank. It was just a little, that's how they made them back in 1960. There was no EPA. The old radiators, there was just a line going right to the ground, and there it peed when the radiator got too warm. Nope, this is going to have a modern overflow tank. And thank you so much to Chad, who found one that perfectly matched our radiator here. You can see I didn't mount it to the side of the radiator. There wasn't enough room for the little bracket to sit. So what I used is original screws on the side of the front of the engine bay that previously held the voltage regulator, which now we don't need because we're going to be using an HEI distributor and modern alternator. So I can just repurpose those holes and the overflow tank will sit right there. Getting closer. Next time on Operation Vagabond Falcon.
Mighty Side Arkham, PA.